Welcome everybody to our next panel here at the Connections Online Connections Online 2025 Wargaming Conference. We are talking about Fight Club International and how we approach wargaming differently as a network. The way we are doing the panel today is that each of us has prepared a spotlight, so to say, on different projects we are running at the club or the society. We do a lot of things beyond that. We're going to talk about that maybe in the final discussion. If you have any questions while we go, feel free to put them in the chat, and I think everybody would be happy to answer them as they come up, but we should also have time in the end. We also have Ed Ferren, who's not with us yet, who will be joining us later today. And we'll be starting by sort of introducing ourselves and giving a bit of an idea of for how long have we been involved with Fight Club International, sort of in which role, and what we personally think is the special thing about how Fight Club International approaches wargaming before we then go into the spotlights. And Richard, please go ahead.
My name's Staff Sergeant Richard Firth. I'm currently an infantryman in the United States Army. I've been with Fight Club for a little over a year. What I do for Fight Club is I familiarize myself with primarily digital war games and then discover their use case for professional training. What I think, or something, I don't know if it's like really something we do different. I would hope that it wouldn't be, but the thing that I like about Fight Club the most is that regardless of the member's professional background or experience, we find place at the table for all of our exercises and all of our projects. So I can get in there with, a college student who's just looking at like geopolitical science or something. And I can be we can be in the same room as a flag officer and then a bunch of enlisted personnel from different nations, and we all have equal say at the table, and we all have like contributing ideas, which is super important because those of us with a professional background are more than likely indoctrinated in our way of thinking for that organization. So that's like, I think, the coolest thing about Fight Club.
All right, Luke, you're next. You're muted at the moment.
Sorry, I was muted on my mic, not just the streamer. So hi, my name is Luke Striegel. I'm currently a cadet at the University of Iowa. So I've actually been I've been a part of Fight Club International for quite some time now, but I only recently started getting active about 6 months ago. So I had the idea sometime last semester. I'm a senior for reference, also in ROTC, the Army ROTC program here, to somehow work wargaming into our curriculum. This was mostly just a pet project of mine at the time, but my professor of military science, which is a lieutenant colonel who leads ROTC programs, had a new initiative when he came in to set aside a budget for a staff ride. And if you guys are familiar with the concept of a staff ride, typically that's like a battlefield tour of some sort, but it kind of just lined up perfectly with our geographical location and what exactly I wanted to implement into our program, that we could do some kind of wargaming staff ride to Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, which is about a 4 or 5 hour drive away from us. So that's how I really got involved with Fight Club, was organizing a air quotes staff ride to the Command General Staff College at Leavenworth to kind of introduce all of the cadets to wargaming as a concept, because that's something that they wouldn't really get to experience unless they were into it as a hobby like I am until significantly later in their careers, if they even get there at all. I believe most of the CGSC participants, students, whatever you want to call them, are 04s, so majors. Probably, like, stats say over half my class would be out of the Army by the time they would ever get to that point. So that's how I've been involved with Fight Club, and ever since then, I've just been trying to dip my toes in everything I can. If I'm available during any of the events, you'll probably find me there. I'm trying to get into more of the planning side of things with Staff Sergeant Firth here, And yeah, we'll see what happens in the future. I'm pretty excited.
All right, cool. Then Ian.
Hi, so I'm Ian Robinson, and I'm a civilian and an industrial research scientist in the chemical industry by background. And I left the industry shortly before COVID, and I decided then to go and pick up some of the statistical designed experiment ideas I had and apply it to a war game with a friend of mine, Mark Flanagan. So we picked up Take That Hill, which we'd seen at Connections UK in the middle noughties, and decided to apply it to that. And we found lots of things out about the game and how to win and how to lose at it. Wrote it up as an academic paper, then sent that to a friend of ours, Major Tom Mowat, and he suggested we send it directly to Major Ed Farron, who was at that time redrafting Take That Hill, and at the point where Fight Club was starting up. So we've been in since about 2020, and we've given Fight Club a satellite intelligence game that we had, which we presented to Connections early doors, and that's now worked its way through into United States military where it's being used. And since then, I've been designing a slew of different analog war games, which are now freely available on the Fight Club International website. And it's been very interesting to work directly with military people, to work on real war game subjects as opposed to just doing game design, and thoroughly enjoying being part of the big club.
All right, great. And then Ada.
Thank you, Jan. Hi all, it's Ada here. I'm a civilian as well. My background is in law, but I started wargaming while I was in college, so it just kind of went from there for me. I got introduced to Fight Club very early in my wargaming career, I would say, like in the first year or so, while I was doing a project for the US Embassy Ankara in Turkey over here. We were designing a war game for beginner level people who had never seen a war game before. And Fight Club was very welcoming for us. So that's when I met the team, Arnell, Ed, Rich and all. So that was a great experience for us. And at that point, we realized that in Turkey, we don't really have a wargaming community, but Fight Club was a very big and welcoming place to be when you just got into wargaming. So we decided, why not get the Turkey chapter going, because we really need this over here. We really need a community like this, for both young people and more, advanced and professional people as well. So we got that going, and I think it's about like my third year here. And what I really like about Fight Club is that, especially if you're a beginner, level war gamer, if you're really new to this, it is a really great community to be in, because you have access to pretty much all the best people pretty much in wargaming, and they're happy to help. There is not really a culture of like hierarchy or whatsoever, but you can really get that information if you really need it, and people are really supportive. So that's what I like about it. And I now have my own wargaming startup where we make war games more easy to play through technology. So yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and then me, I'm Jan Heinemann from Germany. I'm also a civilian historian and political scientist by training, with a background in historical game design and game studies, and have been getting involved with professional wargaming over the past 4 to 5 years. A member with Fight Club International for just over a year too, I think. In August last year, I founded the national chapter for Germany, Fight Club Deutschland, with the idea, because other than or different to the US and the UK and France, maybe, where wargaming is much more institutionalized, over here in Germany it's not. So the idea was to leverage the potential Fight Club has to bring together all the practitioners and those interested in Germany into a community. And we are working on several projects in that direction. Also recently been appointed a board director for Fight Club International. All right, so I'm going to start and talk about a Pax Pamir tournament we did, which was a project that once Fight Club Deutschland was founded, I thought we would need a game that is fairly approachable, easily playable remotely, and well, has the appeal and appearance of a professionally produced and published game, right? And I used to play Pax Pamir a lot at the time. Thought, well, that could be it. Fortunately, there is an online implementation, free to play for everybody, on Rally the Troops, which is a platform I highly recommend if you have the opportunity to access it. I know from secured networks that might be an issue, but the core engine of it is also freely available and could be downloaded and hosted in secure networks. I'm not sure if that's the case for the game modules too, but one could probably get access to them. And what we did is setting up a tournament. Back then, Rally the Troops didn't have the tournament mode they have implemented by now, so we just did it manually. Gathered a few players from around the world who were members in Fight Club International. Some actually joined for the purpose of playing in the tournament, which was also great. And then we just went ahead, did some training games to introduce players. I did a little bit of documentation on how the game would, first of all, the tournament would go down, and then also how the game plays, not so much as to mirror the rules, but to highlight key features which new players might overlook or should probably take into account when playing the game. And then we played that over 4 rounds, as I said, round robin. That is in each iteration, in each round, you take players and match them up based on their previous scores, right? So that way you sort of level out the experience differences they might have. But we didn't only want to play it, right? We also wanted to think about the game. And that is why I asked the players frequently after each round questions on how they perceived the game, how they found Rally the Troops to play the game. Was it approachable or not? How they found the documentation I had prepared in advance. And then we actually went ahead and, based on the feedback, modified the resources we had so that for the next iteration, should we run a similar tournament again, we have much improved documentation we can rely on. And it was very interesting to me to see that even though I think Pax Pamir is, if you haven't played it, just very briefly on the subject, maybe it's about the great game in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Persia, that region, the power struggle between, or the struggle for influence, I should probably say, between the Russian Empire and the British Empire, and then also the upcoming Afghan kingdom, so a national sort of movement. But it's not played from the imperialist powers perspective, but rather from the bottom up. So you are sort of local authorities trying to gather political, economic, military influence in the region and build up your court, the people you have influence over. And that might change over the course of the game, of course. Now, I think it's one of the most elegant game designs out there. Nonetheless, there are quite a lot of moving pieces in there, which are initially probably difficult to comprehend. And I found very interesting that the players, given that they had the documentation and the way that we discussed and reflected about what was going on in the games, and then after each sort of round, how they dealt with the challenges they were confronted with, found it pretty interesting in the first place, and then much more accessible as they had initially thought. That was also an impression they had concerning relative troops as an engine to be used for this purpose. Because if you look at it, it might be at first glance look like a 90s clunky website, which it really isn't. It is an engine that allows you to play the games turn-based or live if you wanted to, and that enforces the rules, but does not sort of optimize all the game effects and mechanics. It actually forces you to click where the pieces go and sort of trigger all the events that should happen would you be playing analog or in person. So it's actually a great platform to learn games. And then we also, as we went further into the tournament, sort of reflected about, is this game useful for educational purposes, right? Would we be able to use it? And that is, as Ada and Richard have pointed out, the beauty, I think, of Fight Club International, that we are such a sort of interdisciplinary group of people from various backgrounds. Would it be feasible to use the game in historical education? Would it be feasible to use the game in professional military education? What would we probably have to change if we use the game in person? And I've put two pictures here of me and two other members of Fight Club Deutschland sort of facilitating the game for a working group at the German Command Staff College, which is working on completely different topics, but is sort of interested to get familiarized with various different game formats and mechanics, and think about how they could adopt them and adapt them into their own game design projects they're working on. And actually, they had, interestingly, a much more harder time to get into the game than we had online in remote play, given that we had relative troops who sort of guided us through the whole thing. And the in-person play, me and the two others who had a little bit of experience with the game always needed to sort of remind players, now, no, you only can do this now, and this is the effect. We've talked about it like 5 times. So it's very interesting. There is a potential to be used with these remote implementations of it. And we have since continued playing the game. I actually, shame on me, should still be publishing the formal report on the tournament and the points that we've taken away from it. But I think that was a very interesting project, and it shows that Fight Club is pretty much a hands-on sort of community, leveraging all the different experiences and interests. And then very quickly, if you have a project you think is valuable to the community as a whole, or might be beneficial in some way, or might have even only aspects that could be adopted for other purposes, very quickly at making these events happen, these formats happen, be it design groups or what have you, or these tournaments. Yeah, I think that's the beauty of it. I will quickly have a look at the chat if there are any questions on Pax Pamir. Yes, there are lots of historical characters in there. Okay, but no specific question on how we implemented it or anything. Well, all right, then I will hand it over to Richard.
Thank you for that, Jen. So Baltic Shield, Operation Perry. So to get to Operation Perry, I'll first just go over Baltic Shield. So Operation Baltic Shield was Fight Club's campaign of learning that was done through Combat Mission Professional Edition. It was actually the first project that I worked on. I had just joined Fight Club because of my military background. I was asked to play test it because I also had an extensive background in playing Combat Mission. It was one of my favorite games as a commercial title. So I looked at authenticity of the scenarios, as well as like just checking for bugs, playability, tactical feasibility. If anyone's messed with the AI editor in Combat Mission, it's an interesting tool to say the least. So a few months go by, like 6 or so months go by, I start building training scenarios in combat mission and other, we'll call them digital war games. And one of my colleagues, Rich, approached me about combining a concept. And I'm going to make a kind of a note here. Hopefully you guys like hold on to it. So we were going to do a TTG, and then we were going to use combat mission, not as the war game itself, but the adjudication method. And this is like an important distinction. So what I did is we decided to tie it as a one-off sequel to Operation Baltic Shield. And so it was this tactical decision game of you were put in charge of a small joint task force, because that's one of the other things that I really look into with creating scenarios is interoperability. Everyone knows their own weapon systems. Everybody knows their own capabilities. But how well do I know my partners in Germany's? How well do I know my partners in the UK? Do I understand their doctrine? So we decided to do a task force of the UK and the Estonian scouts, about 2 platoon size, and they were supposed to do a spoiling attack on a Russian envelopment, basically, of the larger Narva area. And so they got participants, which did not have to be Fight Club members. We opened it up to everybody. They would get a full op order done to like the American standard for op orders, with a threat assessment and a graphical overlay. And then they would write their level written order. And then they could also provide a graphic. And we ended up getting 11 entries in total. We also wanted to make it a competition. 2 of those entries were people within we'll say positions of authority within Fight Club, so we recused them from the competition. Not to say the competition, first off, was very close, so not to say that was like some type of advantage. We just didn't want a board member or somebody being the one that got first place. And what we did then is I took each one of those entries and played it through combat mission, professional edition, and as an infantryman with 15 years of experience, anyone that's familiar with combat mission, like there is that tactical operational layer, but the granularity of control of your individual units is very akin to a squad leaders or team leaders, depending on how small you get. And so I took the written order, and then I would execute the plan as I understood it in combat mission to try and achieve the end state. And I had the freedom of maneuver to make those kinds of calls that an NCO would make. So they didn't have to worry about having a very verbose order. So what went into making it, and this is kind of a good time before I move forward with it to talk about how I like to approach using wargaming for training. So the first thing that I consider is what is the overall training objective and like what is the desired end state. And then from there, you'll probably, a lot of us have seen this where someone will immediately jump, or they'll actually start with, well, I want it to be this kind of scenario with this operational environment consideration. But what I recommend and what I like to do is what game loop enables the learning of that training objective. We're not even talking game yet. We're just talking game loop. So every simulation, every game has a loop, a series of actions that loop around, and you do that continuously. And so that's what I look for. Once I've found that optimal model, then I look at what game systems do this well, and what game systems with maybe a little bit of modification also do it equally as well. Once you've decided on a game system, or you've decided on that optimal game loop, there are 2 other considerations that I like to bring in, which is does the game or simulation support any operational environment concerns. And then also you have oversight considerations. Like if I'm doing something for a professional organization and I have, whoever is going to observe or have oversight over the training may have certain considerations. Myself, and I probably believe most of us in here as avid war gamers, will advocate for any type of war game has a learning objective that can be taken out of it. And I firmly believe that. But the lieutenant colonel may not feel that, a TDG based in a sci-fi universe has any applicability. So that's also a consideration. Once you compile all this together, you can make a game choice decision and then start building out the scenario. So that's how I approach it. And what I feel is important about this approach is, especially like in the professional or military sector, I'll see people be like, oh, I want to do a war game with that's the Denovian threat template in this area. And then they'll want a specific training outcome. And it's like, well, you didn't make these match, right? And then as the designer, that gets like really difficult to do. Before I started using AI to help me build out these digital wargaming scenarios for training, I was probably about 100 hours. And that's if the system didn't need modifications to it, like any type of mod, and the editor was already like really good, ready to go, and easy, friendly to use. So now I'll go back into Operation Perry after I've kind of discussed everything that went through there and go over, back to how we adjudicated it. So I went in there, I played everything, I acted as the NCO, executing the officer's orders, because our overall training objective was, can you take a mission and give orders and execute it without being the one that omnipotently sees everything, which is probably one of the biggest drawbacks to wargaming, is you pretty much always have an omnipotent understanding of the situation and the mechanics. And so that took all of that out of that. And then what we did is we graded on 3 major scales and 1 minor scale. So the first scale was coherency. Was the order coherent? Could I read it? Could I understand it? And because this was multinational, if I had trouble understanding something, or I thought a language barrier might be in an issue, I would reach out to somebody and be like, hey, just double check. So it wasn't like me solely, so there was no bias that way. So I always pulled on an expert if I could. The next one, and that was graded out of 10. And then the next one was mission focus. And this one was really big. This was probably the widest variable scale that I saw in end results, because a lot of times we see a scenario and we're like, how do we kill the enemy? Right? And so how this was adjudicated, same thing, was out of points of 10. And it was, did your order cover the achieving the objective laid out in the commander's intent? And did you do the key tasks? And if you didn't do the key tasks, did you have a reason as to why? And then you would get graded out of 10. And then the last one is the one that I think we think about the most when we play war games, which is like, what was my lethality to casualty ratio? That's what everyone wants to see, right? How many guys did I kill? How many of mine did I lose? And so what we did for this is, it was once again points out of 10. Every 10% of casualties, because all digital systems work off of some type of RNG, was worth a point. So if you had 100 to 90% casualties, if you didn't break that 90, that was still full points, and then so on and so forth, down to 1, which would have been if you had taken 90% casualties and only had 10% of your force remaining. The last one was a minor scale, which is you could provide a COA sketch or some type of graphic. And the reason it was a minor scale, is that it was meant to make up points in the other areas, such as coherency and mission focus. because not everyone is the same type of learner, and not everyone's going to interpret the same way. Also, as an infantryman with 17 years of experience, I could tell you what happens when it gets to the platoon level and the squad level and the fire team level is the only writing you actually see is what are the key tasks, what's the commander's intent. The other 5 pages of that op order are gone, and then we all get around a sand table and we talk our bit. And then we focus on like the really granular stuff. So if you can provide a graphic, like that always speaks so much louder, I think, when we get down to it. And that's something we don't want to lose sight of either when we do war games, especially when they're military focused, or I should say some type of maneuver warfare focused, is what we are representing at the end of the day is units closing with and destroying our nation's enemies. It's a brutal business, and I strongly encourage wargamers to keep that in the back of their mind when everything's getting moved around neatly on the board and we have all these clean adjudication rules. It's a real business when it's happening for real, and so that's always a consideration, I think. So now I'm going to go ahead and talk about Iron Tempest. So if we could go to the next slide. I'm going to use Iron Tempest. I'm going to talk about it from a design standpoint before I hand off to my counterpart, Luke. So the University of Iowa's ROTC program, through Luke, reached out to Fight Club to do a war game with Armor Brigade 2. And so we sat down and we did a meeting, and there were some givens off the bat. They wanted to use Armor Brigade 2. Given my model, I recommended some other some other alternatives, but that's what they went with. So then I went into, what did you guys want your training objectives to be? And same thing, Armor Brigade 2 was the adjudication system, but it was not the primary learning objective. And it was ran very similar to Operation Perry, where they got a full package of 2 standard U.S. military op order graphics, et cetera, and they learned MDMP on their process. I won't go into that too much. Luke will talk about that. They prepped everything, and then myself and Steve Lohr, a Fight Club board member, went down there. He puckstered, and I acted as the GM facilitator, as well as the senior enlisted advisor for each cadet who was filling a command role at the company commander or platoon level. When I built this out, I used the same model that we talked about earlier. And the key considerations were, because they were learning the MDMP process, making sure the scenario, while challenging, showed a proof of concept that the process worked. And then the second one was, when we actually went to execute, we did it in such a way that they had to give verbal orders. So they couldn't just go up to the screen and be tell the puckster, I want to move my unit here. They had to do the 5 W's or something. And they had to do it within 10 seconds. Otherwise, it was continue mission. And so I will now, barring any questions, hand it over to Luke.
Awesome. Thanks, Dick. So yeah, just a quick recap. I'm Luke Striegel, one of the cadets that took part in this exercise. I'm on the very rightmost part of that picture on the right, sitting closest to the screen, and front of Dick there. So when this was first proposed to my cadre at ROTC, it was mostly a pipe dream at the time. It seemed relatively out of reach. It was something that is entirely unheard of in cadet land, as we like to call it. So everything seemed like kind of a stretch. until Fight Club really got involved. So before I get into everything, once again, just thanks to everybody who helped making this a reality. But the build up to actually executing Iron Tempest involved about 3 weeks of classroom prep, because besides me, my entire class, which is twice as big as all these cadets you see in the picture here, had like absolutely no idea what we were doing in the slightest. Like, I am definitely the outlier in my class when it comes to like hobby wargaming. Like, everybody just kind of associates it as a Striegelism that doesn't really have any application to us and won't for the next like 8-10 years or so. So once my professor of military science really bought into it, we had to come up with an ad hoc like MDMP familiarization course, since for the most part MDMP is completely absent from officer training until you hit like the captain level 03, so minimum 3-4 years after commissioning, which is in about a month for us. So he came up with a very, very brief, like, I'm pretty sure MDMP, when it's actually taught, is taught over a span of 2 months. And we condensed it down into 2 1-hour class sessions over just the general, just the absolute basics of what it all consists of and how we could apply it to this scenario. Dick provided us with a couple annexes and a 2 levels up op board, or 1 level up, regardless, a higher level op board for us to break down, as each of the cadets would be assuming the role of a platoon leader. And one cadet, which was myself, would assume the role of the company commander. And it's worth noting that there's 2 iterations. So in addition to myself, one friend who I don't really traditionally war game with, but play games of higher complexity than Call of Duty or any EA Sports games. So I figured he'd be most suited to take the role of company commander. Led our 6 other platoon leaders through like the scenario. So I flipped the op board down to a company level and broke that down for each of the platoon leaders, to have it like digest in that MDMP class a little bit. Each of the platoons, let's see, I gotta remember. We broke it down into a company plus size element for this specific scenario. So we had an infantry company, which composed of the 3 platoon leaders plus me as the company commander, with an attached armor platoon, an attached scout platoon, and 2 attached engineer platoons, which split perfectly in 2. Or when you multiply that by 2, you had just enough leadership slots to accompany my entire class. So that build-up phase, like I said, lasted about 3 weeks. We ran through all the annexes. We broke down all the information we were given into like S2 shop briefs. And we had our notional S3 shop go over what the operational picture was generally going to look like based off of maps and images we were given by Dick. And then when we'd show up, we just put that into motion. So as Dick described, he was there serving as the de facto first sergeant for the company commanders, and Steve Laura was the puckster running the scenario up on the 2 big screens in the classroom for all of us to look at. As the scenario first started, the company commander was basically filling the role of like a mega platoon leader. I had the ability to look at the entire screen and micromanage every single platoon. And then the professor of military science realized that's not actually how this works in real life. You're going to have to rely on the communication skills of all your platoon leaders to gather that operational picture. Because in real life, you're not going to have the real-time updating map that enemies pop up on and disappear on as your guys take them out with live casualty tracking and ammunition counting. It's all relies on communications. So I was eventually flipped around and faced away from the screens and did my best to direct the battle by basically painting a picture on a piece of paper with moving around cubes old-fashioned style based off the reports of what all my platoon leaders were telling me. And all in all, it was a very good experience. I knew I was going to have fun regardless. I knew from the start that I was going to have a good time because I was getting to go and participate in a professional wargaming experience at the Command General Staff College. I was worried about how other people would react to it because nobody else has this type of background. Nobody else does this for fun like I do. So I was really banking on just the interactive experience of it to carry everybody through. And the results were pretty overwhelming, actually. So our class consists of 14 people. About 1/3 of that is medical or somehow connected to med services, just not combat arms. Even they were really engaged with the armored brigade portion of this staff exercise. I truly believe that wargaming is one of the most engaging and effective forms of training available to just anybody in the military, regardless of rank. And I think it's a crying shame that it's really not at all present in our minds until several years down the path in our careers. So yeah, all in all, very good experience. Looking forward to working with Fight Club again. I will not be in an ROTC setting, as I will be commissioning in about a month. But we do hope to package this scenario up in a war game in a box, as some have said it, and be able to easily provide that to other interested ROTC programs who might want to introduce similar initiatives into their curriculum across America. So that's the next step with this program, and we're pretty optimistic to see where it goes.
Awesome. Thank you. Before we continue with Ada, I think there were a few questions on OP Perry, which we might be good to answer now.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. So I think it was what platoon morale effects were there? So we didn't do the training. There was no follow-on effects. But there because it was isolated as the training objective. As far as how combat mission itself does it, sorry, I was not expecting to speak. As far as combat mission itself does it, is there is a morale system based off of incoming fire and casualties taken, and that is actually aggregated. It's actually like a little bit of a good thing and a bad thing, because when you do light infantry, it works very well. Like if a squad gets wiped out, even the full up squads are kind of like a little nervous. The flip side of that is when you start dealing with like strikers in like one of the contemporary scenarios, like a platoon that's dismounted that use strikers correctly and VDO'd 4 clicks out, 2 clicks out, probably doesn't, like in the immediate fight, care if that striker just got slammed by an ATGM. They're 2 clicks away fighting their fight. And just based off the way that system interacts, that actually does affect their morale as well. But this is just the fact that no war game is perfect. And that's why we do AARs as well. So we can always improve.
Yes, and then Edward asked, are there any plans to run it again with a different playgroup?
So people that are interested, I would in these kind of scenarios, especially if you want to be the one moving the pieces around, one, I would say join Fight Club. I run a monthly contemporary or historical war game using or scenario using combat mission. Right now, the contemporary version is we're doing Operation Vigilant Horizon for the Blue 4, and we're doing Operation Red Eclipse for the Red 4. And it's a 2030, like 2035 next war concept. Anytime I feel like you're trying to do anything contemporary, you need to actually be working 5 to 10 years in the future, because what's happening right now is already irrelevant. Anyone that's been operational in any domain knows what happened yesterday is already being improved on the next day.
Right. Okay. And then just as a general follow-up on that, I think that's also one of the great things with Fight Club is that when we go about to test such approaches, then and sort of optimize them, then we have them in the drawer, right? So at any point, if there is interest, if there is demand inside Fight Club, outside Fight Club, then we can pull them up and run any sort of iteration again. Right, and with that,
Real
over
quick,
to-
Jan,
yes.
before we move on, was Jeff Bueller asking about a combat mission platoon morale or armored brigade platoon morale? I didn't catch the exact timestamp that popped up there.
I believe it was a combat mission, but if you want to iterate on
Okay,
armored brigade,
no need if there wasn't an interest. I just wasn't sure if the timestamp had lined up with the slides or not. So sorry to interrupt there.
no worries. All right, Ada, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jan. And it was great to hear about the previous presentation because I will definitely be mentioning some of those. So for my part, I will be mostly talking about Fight Club Turkey and inclusion of Gen Z Plus to wargaming and defense. As Fight Club Turkey, we mainly identify ourselves as the chapter that focuses on youth integration, how we can basically work with the youth more when it comes to wargaming, how we can include them more and how we can make them feel included as well. So just kind of as a general look to it, we did a couple of events in the last couple of months. We've been founded, I think, about 2 years ago. And in the first year, we kind of focused on social media, but it didn't really mean much to us until we really started to do events. We got into doing what we call fight nights. And then once we started doing that, things really took off. And now we have about, a 30 people team of volunteers that are continuously working to organize, book nights, fight nights, putting together all those post videos on LinkedIn that you may come across from time to time. Here you have some visuals on how we approach things. Like you have Literal Commander, we played Machiavellian before, we played Root, we play different war games from time to time. And what we really try to do is to amplify what we do on especially LinkedIn, but also on other socials as well. So we try to kind of broaden the reach that we have in terms of young people. And as I have the mic here, I kind of want to let you know if you, in your organization, in your, friend group, wherever you do wargaming, if you want to include the younger generation, how can you do that? And what is the way to doing it? I'm just seeing questions in the chat, so I will answer as I go. What city is Fight Club Turkey based in? We're all over, but I am based in Ankara personally. Most of our team is in Ankara and Istanbul, but we have 82 cities in total. So we have people from all of that. So we're all over Turkey at this point. So just to continue, how to capture the attention of the younger generation. So just 3 points here, and then I have one additional bonus point in the next slide that's coming up. So the first one is you need to speak their language. I am part of the new generation, so I'm part of Gen Z, so it's maybe easier for me to say this. Some people who are more advanced in their careers and in their lives might have a bit of a trouble adapting their language because we speak, I would say, a completely different language within ourselves. That is partially due to social media, partially due to how we were raised. But it is really important to, when you are putting out flyers, when you're putting out anything like documentation, so on and so forth, it is important to adapt your language so that it is still more accessible to them. So we are able to understand it. But I would say the importance of speaking their language comes to capturing the younger generation's attention. We have a lower attention span, I would say. So whenever we are going through LinkedIn, it's usually twice as fast, or whenever we are going through Discord, Instagram, whatever social media websites, it's twice as fast. So you need to really speak to our eyes and minds when you are trying to put together any type of content that you would like us to see. So what we started doing in Fight Club Turkey is really just adapt our visuals to make them look as interesting, as captivating as possible. When we're putting out, videos or posts, we try to put as little words on it as possible and more visuals so that whenever someone's scrolling that fast, they come across it and then it captures their attention first. And then they look into the post to get more information. This also speaks to them that this is a community that is welcoming to them, that they can adapt. So rather than putting a visual or some type of content that they're not really used to, that is, complicated, filled with words, whatever, we try to make things as easy as possible for them to understand so that they feel welcome. And I think this may go for Gen Z, but I think at this point of time, it also goes for anyone you would like to kind of speak to on social media as well. So the second thing is to highlight what's in it for them. My peers have very little time to focus on because everyone's doing, especially if they are envisioning a future in international relations, defense, security, peace, they're most likely doing 100 things all at once. So there's not really a point for them to participate in a wargaming activity if they don't see the benefit in it. They will most likely not do it just for the fun of it, because most of them don't really know what wargaming is. I didn't. I had no idea. And most of them think that, especially when looked from outside, it's something that is maybe still reserved for professionals that they're not included in. So it is really important to say, oh, come join us. So you will probably meet, mentors. You will meet people that might guide you in your career. You will learn new things. You will get real world practice in a safe to fail environment, so on and so forth. So it is really important to highlight what they will get, what's their benefit in participating in any wargaming activity, because wargamings are, I would say, not easy in my opinion. Most of them are not easy to understand for a beginner level person. And especially as you go, more advanced, you have a bigger scenario with a lot more detailed information. If you don't have a military background, you usually need some time to get adapted to it as well. So if I'm going to put all that effort in, I should be able to understand what I will get out of it and if it's worth it for me. And then the third point, which I think is one of the most important, is to give them the mic. So give them the platform, give them the possibility to talk and to share their opinions. Again, if I participate in a wargaming activity, and then I will most likely be the youngest person in the room. I'm usually the one who's facilitating, so I have that advantage for me speaking personally. But if I'm there as a player, I'm usually the youngest and the less experienced. So I will not be speaking for the most part unless I'm encouraged and I want to participate. There are a lot of benefits to including younger people in these types of activities, because you get different types of worldviews and information out of them. But if you don't give them that platform or that comfort, that they are able to talk, they're able to decide on movements, decide on combat, decide learn all those things that a war game includes, then there's not really a point of having them in the room. So these are the general main points of what we really paid attention to, and this really helped us to grow our community in an environment where wargaming is not known at all. So we had a lot of first-time wargamers in our community back here in Turkey, and they're all hooked, is all I can say. So if you ever want to include more young people in your organization, in your clubs, in your community, I think these are the top 3 things that you should pay attention to. And then I have one more bonus in the next slide that I want to mention, is something that we did differently. So again, I'm a recent wargamer of 4 or 5 years at this point. And when I first got into wargaming, I had no idea what it was. And I was tasked to, design a war game. And to do that, I had to learn a bunch of other war games so I could see what the mechanics were, what the modeling looked like, what the simulation looks like, and then get a bunch of, courses and information and all that. But not everyone has that advantage of, okay, I learn first, and while I'm learning, I get to play. I think I had a very nice position in that. But most people that we are trying to include, most people who envision a career in NATO, in military, in defense, they don't really have that time to learn all those things. So when we try to include them, we try to make it as accessible to them as possible. And this is for beginner level people that it works the best. But what we have done has been also used in different types of war games with professionals, or 4 and 5 as well, which worked wonders. So we created a platform. This was initially created for NATO, for a NATO event last year, where we use AI to help you learn about the scenario and kind of help you decide on what you want to do. Deciding part is kind of the tricky part. Sometimes that doesn't happen. We don't want to include that because we want you to make up your own mind. but sometimes it also comes in handy as kind of like a little push that we want to give to beginner level people. If you're not a beginner in wargaming, fine, you don't really get to do that. We don't really want you to do that. But especially now that wargaming is a lot more complex and you have a wider scenario with a lot more components in it, it is, we think, really important that we don't overbear the player with that read ahead that's like 100 pages long in Times New Roman 11, and then they see it, they're like, oh, when am I supposed to read this? This is a whole academic paper. How am I going to do it? And then they show up to the war game, no one has any idea on what to do because they just like skimmed the first pages and then the last pages, and that's not something that we want to do. And then we will have to explain them what the scenario is, what scenario components are, what the Orbat is during the war game, which leads us to doing only one turn of wargaming in about 4 hours if this is the first time that we're doing this with these people. So we implemented AI and LLM into our platform to kind of help players learn about the scenario. And pretty much everything that you do here, every question that you ask, when you ask them, what you ask them after, we collect all that data. Of course, it is GDPR compliant fully. We don't really collect any specific information on the players. But we make sure that we know what questions you ask at what time so that we get to use that later on. The second thing is playing war games. It is beneficial and it is fun and it is great. But sometimes you get so caught up in the rules that you completely forget about the planning component of it. Sometimes it's not really that important, I get it, but sometimes it is really what we want to see when we have players, especially professional ones, play war games, because we want to see how they think and how they plan and how they come to such conclusions. It happens from time to time that you make a decision in a war game and, it's somewhat a lucky decision that you make. It's not really based on any previous knowledge. It's not really based on the rule set that you got, the mechanics that you got. It's just a lucky decision. And we wanted to find a way to kind of eliminate those lucky decisions and see if the decision that you made was part of, guessing or luck or whatever, but was it kind of a part of a planned discourse with your teammates? So when we put together the questions that you ask, the information that you want to seek, with the plan that you are putting together, and when you are doing it, we kind of get to evaluate how you come to that conclusion. So this help us really see how beneficial this war game is for the player, for what it wants to do first. Just helps us to digitize the war game so we can play it online, which is a really good thing for us because it is really difficult to get all those professionals and people to get into one room. And then third, it helps us really evaluate how did they think about that specific scenario, that specific vignette, so on and so forth. And this really helped us play war games with beginner level people because I would say we're a bit more adapted to anything that's digital. And it really speaks to us when we have kind of a more constructed view that we can follow, like the plannings, how it works, how does military planning work, so on and so forth, so that we get lost a little less. And having that kind of sidekick of LLM right next to you where you can ask decisions at all times, it really helps because I just want to learn about the scenario in a quick and fast way, and I don't want to go through 50 pages of documents to find it, and I really want it to come up fast. And if you train it in a good way, then that's perfectly fine. It will come up and it will give you good results that will be useful for you. So this is pretty much it. I don't want to take up anyone's time after myself. So these are the 4 main points that we really, really, really pay attention to and that we really, value in Fight Club Turkey. And we feel extremely happy to be a part of the Fight Club community and work with other chapters. So let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Ada. Okay. Don't see any questions now, but as I said, we can circle back to them later on. So
All right,
then
thank you.
next up is Ian.
Hi. So Kaliningrad is a two-player analog strategic game which focuses on the Baltics in the near future to explore the flavor of a possible war in that theater. And the game is about Russia trying to seize one or more of the Baltic states to create a land corridor to Kaliningrad, or to either seize the Suwalki Gap. So consequently, it's a game about Russia with Belarus against NATO forces. And in the game jam that we've created here, we've got fluctuations in force levels which follow a systematic experimental design pattern. So the game is freely available from the analog channel on Fight Club International. You can download it and then it's a print and play around the table, or alternatively, it's available on Tabletop Simulator. And that's where we've done the game jam. Very quickly, there's about the game. It's a little bit different from most war games in the map uses a Voronoi diagram, and normally we obviously have things like either squares or tiles or hexes. But in this game, we've got tiles that are based on urban center acting as a loci between different tiles, and the Voronoi process dissects that out to make seed points. So we get a map with roughly equal population density, which looks quite nice to see. The tiles have no geographic details, but they are colored to the national flag, so it's quite simple to see how they go. We've got combined forces, we've got land forces, grey zone forces, air forces, naval forces, tactical nuclear weapons. Quickly, there's an air battle that starts the game turn sequence, and the winning player there then uses air dominance to then explore whether they want to attack land or sea forces, which is effective, but there's a good chance of being shot down eventually if you continue to do this. So the process is attritional on your air forces. There's a movement stage which is tailored for both land and sea. Then there's land attacks that can be conducted either adjacent or close attacks, determining on adjacent tiles. There's a benefit in defending your capital cities, and there's a naturally occurring attritional mechanism from the dice mechanisms we've got built into the game. Very, very simple, but it tends to produce the 2 to 3 to 1 attack advantage without any special rules for doing that. But of course, if you mass your troops up in a particular area, there's a caveat emptor that you might prompt a tactical nuclear weapon strike on you. And there's an ability to do shore to sea attacks. Likewise, with sea attacks, you could do sea to sea or sea to shore attacks, and you can transport NATO troops to friendly coastal regions around with ports. There's a reinforcement stage, which has NATO having a general gathering momentum in numbers, with Russia getting more earlier on and then steadying out. And we mentioned tactical nuclear weapons, so they are available in some scenarios and not in others. If you do have them, there's the potential for tit-for-tat escalation between players. They are quite effective in hitting large concentrations of troops. But there's a built-in mechanism here to look at escalation to strategic nuclear weapons exchange, which ends the game in Armageddon. And that's a simple dice mechanism to say that for every tactical nuclear weapon used in the game so far, you roll a 1d6. And if the total thrown is less than or equal to the number so far, we've got ourselves Armageddon. So there's a disincentive to keep on using tactical nuclear weapon. And on top of that, there's a ceasefire mechanism, which then prompts the game to finish within no longer than 18 turns. The mechanism involves a 3d6 roll, which means to say that if you have a dice roll which is equal to or less than the game turn, then the game will be ending the next turn, which gives it an uncertain ending, which prompts Russia to attack quickly and NATO correspondingly to stall to get wider help. The game is very simple and quick to play, and it allows rapid what-if scenarios testing to allow more detailed war planning to occur on interesting outcomes in more detailed war games. So in the game jam, you can see we have 5 base cases there. In the case of game 1, we played this on Tabletop Simulator a couple of weeks ago. So we have NATO in its best case, Russia facing probably its worst case. So in this case, we had in game 1, the USA troops were in. NATO troops weren't fully rearmed, which gives it a base troop level in the game. But we assume that the Russians are still pinned down in the Ukraine war, so they have a reduced force level. And with Russia attacking, it was overstretched and it made quite slow progress as there was no concentration of force. So we often saw 1-to-1 long-range fire exchanges rather than a 3-to-1 close combat attack. As NATO reinforcements started to enter the theatre, Russia started to use tactical nuclear weapons to wipe out the NATO brigades massing in the Suwalki Gap. So after the first use, there was an option for counterforce strike by NATO, but the NATO player declared, I'm not going to use nukes. And that had an interesting effect there because, of course, that encouraged Russia to start to use nukes a second time. So after about 9 turns, the Finns were beginning to close down on St. Petersburg. Kaliningrad had fallen to NATO troops. Minsk was largely undefended. And under that circumstances, with Russia clearly losing, they threw in a final tactical nuclear weapon. And unfortunately, that precipitated a general nuclear exchange. So in this scenario, no one won the game. So it's true that obviously the US has put its commitment to Europe under the nuclear umbrella, but whether there are tactical nuclear weapons available or not, that will be coming out in the future. It's probably unlikely that Russia would willingly try to go to war under these conditions. It's probably too bold a goal to do it under this depleted Russian force scenario. Maybe in reality, it might try and go towards ethnic Russian enclaves in the Baltic states, which are close to the Russian border. Or alternatively, Russia could go straight for the land bridge to Kaliningrad through Lithuania. But one can see that if one did try this scenario by this simple game, it might end in tears for everyone. If we then look at game 5, which is at the back end of our scenarios, we have USA out of theatre, NATO Europeans not fully rearmed, and with the Ukraine war ending, we have full Russian and Belarus use. And of course, the fact that the Ukrainian war had ended means that NATO have peacekeeping troops stationed in field, which takes them out of this theatre. And this kind of looks at the scenario that we may potentially be looking at in the mid to late from 2025 to 2027, if the US do not fully commit to Europe, and NATO having to stretch itself out to look at helping do peacekeeping forces in the Ukraine war. And European rearmament is still a talking shop. So in this scenario, Russia had a significant military advantage and was better achieving air dominance. So Russia can go for broke to seize the entirety of the Baltics, which it pretty much did, without the need to use tactical nuclear weapons, which NATO didn't have in this scenario. So basically, NATO was reduced to fighting a limiting delaying action and hold the capitals, hoping for a general peace to come as a political settlement would come down. But it didn't look very good for NATO under those circumstances. So in scenarios 2 through to 4, we can see that there are extra fluctuations going on in all the forces that are available. And we have a variation here in NATO being either rearmed or not being rearmed, and either the Ukrainian war continuing or not continuing. And in games 2 to 5, we have the USA out, potentially redeployed, obviously, out to the Pacific theater to face down a possible simultaneous Taiwanese attack. And we are in the process of gaming these options out. I think Tabletop Simulator is a great way of being able to play this game in a distributed manner from players based around Fight Club International. And well, you know, come in and join us, play the game, and see what you can learn from it.
Great, thank you very much. And then finally we have Ed, who joined us. Nice to see you.
Hey, John, thanks.
So
Hey.
please introduce yourself, even though on Monday you already showed off some of our games, and then Go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Ed Farron, I'm one of the directors and co-founders of Fight Club International. If you can go back to Monday's presentation, you can see me talk about all the analog games, which included Kaliningrad. I'm going to be talking to you in a second about the Iran Matrix game. I just wanted to bookend Ian's excellent presentation on the Kaliningrad Game Jam to just highlight the value of an analog game system versus a digital game system in this regard, because as most people might be feeling, living week to week right now with geopolitics, it's quite a tumultuous time. The ability to quickly take a system that works good enough and turn it into that 5-game jam really shows the value of the flexibility of an analog system. Were you to try and do that with a digital system, especially if it was proprietary to a commercial company, you would be looking to have that good to go maybe in 2026. And by then, the geopolitical situation you were seeking to test has already panned out in one way or the other. So it's just another plug to an analog system. And although that system is not high fidelity, the results are interesting, and you could then take those and run them in a more classified setting, either with an analog or a digital system, having worked out the parameters that you want to test. So just want to do a big check up to that. I can see that some of my slide edits from earlier have not made it in. So Jan, I'm just going to quickly share screen with the latest one, if that's all right, because I'm the last presenter.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Should be good to do that. Cool. You just check this is coming through.
Yes, very good.
Awesome. Okay, so Matrix Gaming, not to be confused with Matrix Games the company. This is the largely unstructured discussion seminar system using argument-based adjudication. We have had an example of Matrix Gaming in the past in the club, in the US Fight Club chapter. They did one on first contact with an alien race, alien contact moving closer to Earth, and how the major powers of the Earth either come together or separate apart, and how to react to that. We wanted to focus in on one that was a bit more tangible. So at the end of 2024, we were looking ahead at where stuff might be bubbling up in the world. The Pacific was obviously one. Europe was obviously one. We wanted to do one slightly different as a test case, slightly more down and in. Middle East was considered to be too live an issue, but Iran, focusing on instability within Iran, was considered to be a good enough use case of interest to people. So a live scenario, but not necessarily going to be publicly distraughting to be involved in. Although we did have some issues with real life stuff happening, such as the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, throwing that in, as in real life that happened, and we had to basically feed that into the game to avoid the suspension of disbelief, as it were. So we were running this asynchronously over Discord. So most of the times that Matrix games get run, you turn up and you do them in person, round a table with a map, with some counters, with the facilitator, and you kind of smash it all out in a day. And generally speaking, you have a few minutes to come up with your turn. Yes, you can do negotiations and so on and so forth. But once the faction or actor before you has taken their action and the facilitator has ruled, you maybe have a few seconds to then either go with the one that you've pre-thought, or you need to come up with a new one, which can lead to some knee-jerk, off-the-cuff responses. This was a much more measured pace. Generally speaking, there was 24 hours per actor action, so a week to do all 6 factions plus the fate player, and then to wrap it up and do it again, which allowed for a bit more of a considered response. We also had a number of players in each faction, so there was roughly 2 or 3 on each faction's Discord channel, which allowed for some people to be more active or less active as the weeks went on. But they were able to talk through things they could or could not do, or how they would react, etc. And all of this was being passively recorded in Discord, which allowed analysis, post-game analysis, which is again something that you can struggle to do in an in-person Matrix game, because the facilitator is largely fixed to adjudicating each turn, and the discussions about potential actions, which are where a lot of the insight could be gleaned, might get missed unless there's a data capture team running around. And again, people thinking about things in their head is not somewhere we can currently or potentially ethically should ever get to interrogate. So getting people to discuss it and have that recorded passively is great. We did use a large language model, which was a version of ChatGPT built specifically for Matrix games. This wasn't one that we built. It was one that is publicly available. Took it, gave it some basic training, though not enough, as it turned out, and then let it loose on the system. There is a full report of this on the website, which you can access. It's in our past campaigns section. And you can read the sort of 32-page report on it if you want. The background to the scenario, well, we planned this in 2024, so we didn't know what was going to happen in 2025. We knew obviously that Donald Trump had won the election, and we assumed that the maximum pressure doctrine would come back with full force, which I think has been proven correct. And then we built on top of the things that we've already seen in Iran that's sort of shown there on the left. We didn't do the sort of tipping point example of having the supreme leader die and creating a power vacuum, but that was something that was discussed that could have been a good way to start the scenario. The tipping point, so crisis point for the starting scenario was the destruction of the Karg Island oil terminal, where much of the Iran's ability to export crude comes from, and that was not attributed to any particular thing, which left the stage open to think whether it was Mossad, regional insurgents, an accident, sabotage, and so on and so forth. We had 6 factions that the players were engaged in, and we had a fate player, which was also played by the large language model. The factions generally aligned either on a pro or anti status quo. So we had the regime, we had the IRGC, and we had the Artesh. Generally on the pro regime side, for pro status quo, and then we had ethnic insurgents, foreign powers, and the civil protest movement on the sort of anti-status quo. And you can see on that grid there, they're aligned either being primarily military means or primarily economic means, which means we have a good spread over the grid. And some of these factions are naturally ill-disposed towards each other and naturally favorably disposed towards each other, which allows for a lot of inter-negotiation. And the factions could negotiate with each other over Discord. And there were some good examples of, outright lying and misdirection and, false promises and so on throughout the course of the game. Here's all the turns and actions within the turns lined up with the die roll system that we applied. This just highlights that, generally speaking, every faction, the majority of the time, had their argument become a success, because the aim is to argue for something that you would be able to achieve with significant justification. And yes, you can have counters proposed, but the die chance should be in your favor if you've got good justification. The explosion icons indicate the use of violence, which also highlights that most of the time there was not outright violence being inflicted by one faction on another faction. And as you can see, we had Fate Player, which is the yin and the yang icon, intervening at various points. At the end of turn 3, we put the Assad swept from power in to reset the status quo, because it was causing a lot of suspension of disbelief issues with the players as we moved further ahead. We did not do turn 6, so there is not a missing series of text boxes there. That was a conscious decision on me, the organizer. I sort of knew I wasn't going to do turn 6, but the players didn't know they weren't going to do turn 6 until the end of turn 5, and they had done planning for turn 6, because we wanted to avoid the last turn madness and badness, which often comes in. And there were talks of like a coup and, storming the palace and this sort of thing, just because it was the last turn. So we wanted to cut it there to see where people were at. A fairly measured Matrix game in the sense of what actually happened. You had various factions gain or lose influence over the course of the turn. Generally speaking, the Artesh increased, the regime decreased. The poor regional insurgents had a moment of sort of increase in the middle and then drop down towards the end. And the foreign powers, being as they are, maintained quite a high level throughout, but weren't really able to influence results in the country to any particular outcome. Each of the factions had a number of objectives which they were trying to achieve. These were known to all the players at the start in the faction brief, and they would then argue for them at the end, which when we did the wash-up at the end, everyone argued with who'd done the best, etc. Players struggled to identify a critical or decisive action or turn, other than the civil protest movement organizing itself into clandestine cells early on in the game, which really gave it more opportunity to survive suppression by the IRGC, and the regional insurgents making an attack on a port facility in the east of the country, which was soundly defeated and set them back for at least one, if not two turns, which basically took them out of the late game. By the end of the game, the regime was still in power, but was definitely in a worse place. The Artesh were on the streets of the capital guarding critical sites, and a lot of the protest movement and normal Iranian citizens were also on the street protesting, and the IRGC was still a potent force, but wasn't really able to disperse them at the risk of then running into the Artesh and potentially creating that power battle between the two guardians of the state. The civil protest movement was in a good position to demand for concessions, but might not been able to carry all the way through to a democratic transition. And the ethnic insurgents were largely licking their wounds, and the foreign powers had interjected at various points, but didn't really seem like they were able to steer anything in any particular way. And the foreign powers were variously represented by USA, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the EU, in that order, depending on which one the players felt they wanted to act. We didn't have any kind of system to make potentially an irrational leader declaration from the White House. So the US actions were much more measured than perhaps we have seen in recent times. The key findings that came out from it were that faction coordination was really important. The status quo factions were very good at coordinating what they wanted to do. So the regime, the IRGC, and the Artesh, and they were very, to each other at least, they were very much playing on the same side, whether they were going to maintain that if the game had gone on for a number of turns. The anti-status quo factions were not able necessarily to get that coordination lined up in the way that would have given them the best effect. Violence was rare. So this idea that it's a military coup or nothing is probably to be dispelled. Most heavily featured was economic disruption and information operations and positioning relative to each other. Foreign influence is disruptive, but in and of itself is not conclusive. And the foreign powers kind of need to pick a horse, whether it's going to be influencing the Artesh to turn against the regime, supporting the civil protest movement, or supporting the regional insurgents. And again, in the game, these are just simple factions. In reality, these are a myriad of groups and subgroups and so on and so forth. And once you provide weapons or money, where that actually goes and how that's used is outside of your control. I chose to have a varied turn order based where I thought the initiative was landing, but I always staggered it so there was a pro and anti status quo faction in that order. So you had that action reaction cycle. But because it wasn't a fixed turn order, the players were not able necessarily to do long-term planning, and that might have been a potential difficulty for them. That might reflect real life, however. So that might be something to change in the future. And the bit everyone wants to hear about the LLM was a significant help. However, anyone who thinks you can run a Matrix game using AI, I caution you to test it, and structure its responses by coding its rules through the interface of prompting it so you get the right answers. We had a number of issues with it, which if a facilitator was not tracking, it would have potentially unhinged the game. You can use it in a number of ways, which is shown here on the left. It was really helpful in generating the mass of the post pre-game material, which again, I would encourage a human to review. You should never be getting the AI to do anything for you completely. It was good at tracking actions and arguments across the sort of chat history. And it was also able to do a preliminary stacking of plausibility of arguments, so strong, moderate, or weak. But again, you might need to interrogate it in the Socratic dialogue to understand its thought processes. And once you decide on the adjudication, once you do the adjudication, and never let it roll dice, because it will not roll dice in a way that dice would be rolled at distribution. Always roll the dice yourself and tell it the modifiers and everything that you've gone for. But after I've done that, then it was very good at generating a narrative summary, a couple of pages of text, turning it into a newspaper report, so on and so forth. Again, always check it, but that's a way to shave some of the time that might take from you organizing the game and running the game asynchronously. It was also good at being the fate player. Again, if you have the subject matter experts, your fate player would be best played by a bunch of people who are experts in Iran and the geopolitical stuff and so on and so forth. I wasn't blessed to have that, so the LLM had that, and again generates a number of ideas, which then I would tend to pick from one that would make the most appropriate. And it's also able to facilitate debate between various different faction disputes on what is and what is not a con. So great to have. Do not think it's the easy button or the cheat sheet. The best practices are shown there on the right, and this is all in the report, so I won't labor the point, but you have to reinforce the structure to it. It will tend to have a recency bias, and so therefore it needs to go back through the whole list of things to check that, what are the starting facts of the scenario, what are the new facts that have been established through successful arguments, what are the advantages and disadvantages of the factions that are in play if you're doing that sort of thing, so on and so forth. And then making the narrative generate in a way that actually helps players, like references to geography was useful, so we could update the player map and so on and so forth. And that is the end of the Matrix game. Questions for me or for anyone else on the panel?
Great, thanks a lot, Ed. I don't see any immediate questions in the chat on the Matrix game, but feel free to post them. Maybe let's get back to the sort of the initial point, like how do we do things differently? I think the range of formats and approaches we have seen on this panel gives a good idea of what's going on. And if you have the time, go back and watch Ed's presentation from Monday, where you again can see a lot of the game designs that have come out of Fight Club International and are available digitally, some also in print. But to everybody on the panel, any final thoughts?
I would just say that having been in the Matrix game, it's a very, very useful exercise in stretching your imagination into an area that you would not normally think about. I ended up in the regime camp, so I fully endorse what Ed was saying. It certainly felt that we were slowly drowning in circumstances and events as they happened in real time. But if I hadn't have volunteered into that slot, I wouldn't have got that viewpoint in as an experience. You get another one, of course, but the Matrix game is very useful adjunct to learning quickly about an area that you might not think about. So it's great.
Yeah, I can definitely second that, because I was on the insurgent side. I think also sort of in charge when the decision was made to attack the port facilities, which, as Ed mentioned, turned out horribly for us. But yeah, it gives pretty good insights as to how many different sort of factors there are to take into consideration, and which the image you have of the situation as you think it is might not quite be how it really is or would go down then in reality.
I'd like to say something too, which is I do a lot with like the technical stuff and the training. I'm an NCO. I love to do training. But it was really good to hear Ada speak on involving the younger generation. It's actually something I just got off the trail, drill sergeant, right? I just got done being a drill sergeant 2 years ago, and you're dealing with young people, and you'll see some of the old hats really struggle with this concept, because drill sergeants are supposed to be a certain way. But if you could kind of break that mold of what was done for you to be effective for your student, you produce a more lethal warfighter. And then like the last thing I'll say is like we're fighting for our future. So even though I'm a relatively young man, I'm 34, I'm eligible for retirement, having served 20 years in 3 years. People like Ada and Luke are the future of our defense and of our military. And so getting them involved now is more crucial than it's ever been. So great points.
Luke, did you want to say something? I saw you unmuted.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. I see Jeff's question on how does one learn to speak Gen Z. It's a really hard question, and maybe Ada can weigh on in this too, because like I feel like wargaming is inherently something that appeals to an older demographic. Ada, I was going to ask you, since I'm not familiar with Fight Club Turkey at all. Like, what are your demographics like? Because like US Fight Club is, I would confidently say I'm one of the younger members there. Same with Fight Club International and the Discords. Like, and that's not any like consequences of how Fight Club does things. I just think wargaming is inherently kind of a difficult branch to get Gen Z into. And that's not like a modern problem. I feel like wargaming has all, and correct me if I'm wrong, anybody older than me, so everybody. Like I feel like wargaming has always been something that has appealed to like an older, more experienced demographic than what you would traditionally associate like us being into. Not to spark a dialogue within the panel or anything, but that's just my opinion.
To answer your question, Luke, Fight Club Turkey is like 60%, I would say, 18 to 26, 27 years old, and then 40% over 35 up to about 60, I would say. So more advanced professional, sometimes retired military. But that is kind of because of the way that we positioned ourselves. We wanted Fight Club Turkey to be a community where people, especially young people who want to get into defense, a place where they could meet older and more knowledgeable people from military, from academia, etc. And then basically be in the same platform, be in the same room as them, and learn from them. Because especially the way that things are set up over here, it's a very hierarchical structure that weighs heavily on respect, and of course it weighs almost always on respect, but it is sometimes so much so that you don't really get to talk to people who have more experience than you. Like you cannot ask a lot of questions to them. So we kind of wanted to be the place where you could have free and complete access to mentors who want to support the younger generation, which we think is something that is very incredibly important. And in terms of speaking Gen Z, I would say, well, it is a very specific way to speak, but I don't think it's a completely different language. I think it's a more direct language. I think it is a little bit more sincere, I would say. So you have to be maybe a little less professional when you're speaking. And something that could make things a lot easier for you to approach Gen Z, I would say, would be to use less terms and less abbreviations. Or if you use an abbreviation, just put that right next to it so people can understand. I think that would make things a lot easier. And just be direct. Like when we are putting things together, like content or anything in a war game, we try to be as direct, and we want that text to be as small as possible. So we want to kind of not directly say things at all times. Sometimes you kind of have to go to the longer route when you're trying to tell a story, like a road to crisis document. You will not just say lines and lines and lines. It still has to tell a story, but it should still tell a story in an understandable way, where it is not like a 18th century English document, but it is more adapted to the language that we are speaking today. So I would say to go down that route. And as you, I think, engage more with younger people, you kind of understand really how to the point they are. While I'm engaging more with my peers, especially within the wargaming domain, which is something that has been, very freeing and so much fun so far. I see that we are really just direct to the point, and we just try to, tick things off and get to it, rather than sometimes being extra respectful, or like, extra careful about what we are saying. Sometimes you just need to get the point across. And I think that would make things a lot more easier when you're trying to speak Gen Z. So that's my weight on the subject.
Yeah, and in addition to that, like something that I think Fight Club does well, but I've heard discussion of possibly changing in the future, is just the accessibility in terms of like where your home base is. And that's just me referring to Discord. Like if you want to target like a younger audience, setting up a base of operations that's accessible to them and familiar to them is critical, but that opens up its own can of worms, which I know the Fight Club board of directors has noticed. Like Discord is kind of a difficult platform to manage expanding libraries of content on. And you also have like the external factors like, oh, there's kind of a large portion of this owned by Chinese companies. And if we're going to get into increasingly professional defense topics, like that opens up its own separate, that's a whole other story. And it's a balancing game, I feel like. And then again, to answer Jeff, making like the actual programming and like activities that you do come up with enticing, because like I love a good analog game. Like I've enjoyed pretty much all the Matrix games that I've taken part of with Fight Club. But the fact of the matter is, you're not going to draw a crowd of 21-year-olds to play a brand new Matrix war game on Tabletop Simulator. Like you're just not. Like, sure, that would have killed back in the day when there was no flashy new technology. But like Ada was saying, you have a generation of people with unfortunately very short attention spans. Like the more engaging, and I'm not saying like Hollywood flashy, but modern you can make content, like the more likely you are to attract people our age. And like, yeah, that kind of sucks. Like I wish you could just say like, oh, just have better attention spans. Like it's a negative character trait, but it's just the fact of the matter. It's the world we live in. So
Yeah,
love your work though, Ian. I've enjoyed all the Matrix games. I actually printed out the satellite one and played with my grandma over Christmas. So
I'll also weigh in it on this one as someone that's had to learn to speak Gen Z, as the coined term, which is I think a lot of older people think that they need to portray themselves as a role model instead of just naturally being the role model, and then that in turn can make you standoffish. So if you just they're people, right? Everyone, we're all people. So if we just are genuine with them, I also have a 17-year-old. So like, it's I got a 12-year-old, but they're people. So it's just about being genuine. And I learned this once again, pulling on drill sergeant. It is like, there's a time and a place for a drill sergeant to be like, seem godly. But then as I get to that mentorship piece, I need to be shown making mistakes. I need to be shown that I can be funny. I need to show that I relate to them in some way. So it's like making any other relationship, find the common ground and then match their energy, and let them speak, because mentors like to talk a lot, but you can't mentor without listening. Listening is more important to the mentorship than speaking. And I'll close it there, because then I'm doing more speaking than listening.
Yeah, on
If I
that point, I might just want to just add that Fight Club is trying to kick off a Gen Z to non-Gen Z mentoring mentee program, and that could include Gen Z to Gen Z mentoring. Let's not forget that there are, the age is not the default for experience, but we are trying to do that. We're conscious there is a huge generational gap. Professional wargaming, a bit like the population, is facing a sort of potential collapse as the number of professional wargamers retire and, you know, move on to the tabletop simulator in the sky, and there is no one coming in behind them to replace them. And a lot of government organizations are faced with their, you know, 3 decades expert wargamer retiring and looking around for their replacement and failing to realize that the time to train that replacement was 10 years ago, not now. There is still a requirement to do a fair amount of wargaming to get wargaming experience. And we can't do it. We can't really get people interested young enough. And on the military side, we often don't use wargaming until mid or senior grade. And often then you're coming in as more of a sponsor. You don't really know the system. You're just waiting for the data set, the report to buy the fancy thing that your service needs. So there's a huge problem across the board with this. I do like Luke's point about attraction, because it does highlight that sometimes you need to have things that attract people to wargaming that potentially older generations might say that's not a serious war game, or it's too gamey, or it's not professional enough, or whatever. But that's there to attract people in, and then when you're in, you know, having lost, you know, 3 rounds of Warner or whatever, you realize you want to learn a bit more about tactics, and then maybe you watch a seminar on tactics, and then maybe you see some people doing a TDG and you get involved with that, and then, you know, down the line you are that person running some operational level Starfex, but you got interested because you saw some like tanks blowing up in 4K as opposed to the Matrix game. So yeah, we're all guilty of that, and the Discord comment's great as well, because only about 33% of the membership is on Discord. So for every Gen Z person we have on the Discord, there's a boomer who's like, I can't deal with this. There's too many things going on. I'm out, you know, and we're just getting the newsletters. So there's probably like a horizon window of platform where, you know, there's people above this line who don't get it, and there's people below this line who don't like it because they're on to the next thing. And whichever platform you pick, you're just moving that bar, that candlestick up and down. So it is a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of features too, like the kids aren't playing Command Modern Operations. Like fact. You're not going to attract that Gen Z demographic with a UI and game organized in the way that Command is. Now, if you add something like real-time multiplayer to it, then yeah, you might have a few more younger people hop in who would only get this under the circumstance that they could to prove to their friend that they are way better at 1970s naval tactics than like their friend, or insert whatever you hyperfixate on there. So some like a note for war game designers is to like cater to your audience. Like if you want to attract that Gen Z audience, then you better make it flashy, and you better make sure they can play with their friends.
If I can just come back to Luke as well, thanks for the plug on the satellite game. And yeah, there's a good case point in designing, because as a physicist, I'm well aware of all the itty bitty detail of all the maths, but how do you turn that into a playable game system that, you know, people who know nothing can get a flavor of what's going on? So that's the challenge for game design if you're doing analog games, is to get enough detail in to make it worth your while for everyone to play, but not drown people in the reality of it, because that's too much. And besides, you're going to use a computer simulation to do all of that. So, you know, the point of some of the Fight Club games is to educate as well as instruct on what goes on. But, you know, if you think of it from an educational viewpoint, what is it that you need to put in order to get someone to get an educational experience out? Don't swamp them. And you go back to the earlier generation of wargame designers that I was part of when I was younger. SPI games are fantastic, but the detail is overwhelming, and I doubt now that many young people would want to plow their way through some of the rule sets in the games created then. They're fantastic games, but you're not really going to want to play a 1 week North African war game that SPI produced, which accounted for how much water you would drink depending on where you were and what kind of troops you were. We don't go to that level of detail now. You know, we want it a little bit clicker and swisher and clicker than that.
Something else I'll say from a game design point. So there's for those of you that are interested in game design, is anytime you're doing anything with a digital system, I don't know if you guys have ever heard the 3-step rule. So you never want in a digital system for the desired outcome of the user to have more than 3 steps to get there. So like you think about like a game menu, you need to be able to click something within three clicks. You need to be where the desired point is, right? So from like a launch menu, someone should be playing the game within like 3 clicks of a mouse. When you're moving troops around or like giving commands or whatever the game mechanic is, it should be done in before you hit that 3 clicks. And then if you look at analog, you have to do everything on analog. So you want to even reduce that maybe to 2 or even 1. And that's where like certain games like Ed shared a video on Downrange with me where like you have all these modifiers. You'll see these games where you have all these positive and negative modifiers and multipliers, and you're doing all this crazy math, and it's instead just compare negatives and positives in an abstract way and then have some type of advantage, disadvantage, and then you're still just rolling a dice once, right? So you can do things that make it count, but you want to limit the amount of steps to get to that result. It also speaks to like the psychology of gaming. So like what happens is, you do something and you get a dopamine hit, and then you do something again and you get a dopamine hit. And if you fail, you're immediately going to want to go back in and try it again. And then eventually when you get that final outcome, you get that serotonin, which is that calm, like content, I've achieved something feeling. So if these processes are too long, they're not as engaging. And so something that's happened is people that are older, the way that they got dopamine and the activities they did, they took longer, so their brains are conditioned for longer stints without dopamine, whereas like younger people are more used to constant dopamine hits. And I won't go too much into neuroscience about it, but that is a factor as well.
Right. Sorry. Okay. So we are slowly running out of time. I know there's one additional question for Ada in the chat, but I wanted to add an observation from the concerns like the Gen Z question, how you get people to play certain games or to engage with the community, first of all, is from different contexts from the International Kriegsspiel Society, where I'm also involved with. And we recently had an increase of, and it's still ongoing, of over 300 members, like out of a sudden, because someone did a video on the Kriegsspiel they were involved in and created a very sort of appealing narrative of what was going on, how they felt sort of immersed, which sort of decision space they had, which of sort of challenges and problems they faced, and so forth. So that sort of got to people, and also younger people. I don't have sort of a solid empiric proof to that, but from what I gather, talking to the people, I think there's a good amount of younger players in there. And those are, as Luke has pointed out, probably not people I would gain to or get to play Kriegsspiel if I told them, hey, that's a game this old guy in the 19th century created. It's all about staring at maps for hours and making some decisions, right? It's the narrative, sort of the way you portray and present that. And then actually, when you got them hooked, then you actually have them playing 4 hours. So if they really feel like the tension and the agency they can get with the games, and also the insights and the social component around it, the community around it, which also Fight Club provides, then you get them to play and invest and commit. All right. And then I guess the final question, if I can find it somewhere. There was one. There it is.
Oh, okay. So Jeff is asking what were my early war games experiences. I just want to clarify if that relates to what my experiences were before, or if I have played any, war games that date a while back and what my experiences with them were.
I don't know. Just make an assumption and go from there, I think.
Okay, I'll start talking about my experience with designing war games and then continue with the second one. Okay, first war games. So I guess war games that date a while back, right?
Mhm.
Okay, cool. So just to be completely frank and clear with everyone, which I think is a good representative of most Gen Z people, I'm not a big game person per se, which might come off controversial at this point. But before I started wargaming, most I did was like Minecraft or Monopoly. So I was never that big of a game person. I did play like PlayStation or whatever, and I played like Second World War games there. But I was not specifically interested in gaming or wargaming or any type of stuff that relates to that area. And when I got into wargaming, my mentors, they had me basically play like Memoir 44, very easy stuff, and then I kind of like advanced from there. And during that advancement, I came across war games that date a while back, and I still do. From time to time, while we are trying to kind of build different war games, we're doing a Pervasive war game with Fight Club Deutschland with Jan right now. So that has us playing some war games or like some miniature games that date a while back, that were designed a while back, or at least have mechanics from early on. And when I come across those right now, I have a bit more experience and I'm a bit more interested in the subject. So I now like wargaming and gaming, and it has captured my attention. But when I remember like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, when I was just first starting off and I didn't really know much about these subjects, they were incredibly boring to me. And I completely understand that it is a very, interesting subject to be an interesting subject to do research in. But it is interesting if you have interest in it. And if it is something that you are just seeing for the first time, especially like war games that date 20 to 30 years back, the visuals, they are they are not easy to understand. The language, it goes the same. And now when we design war games, we do tutorial levels, we do read aheads, we do road to crises documents. So we have these documents that prepare you to know about and learn about the war game. But when you look at those war games that were designed a while back, you see that it is mostly designed for professionals or people who are incredibly interested in the subject, that they kind of already come with that information in their brain already. So when you're trying to learn that game and understand that game, it's complete chaos. It is not fun. It's somewhat painful even when you are not that knowledgeable on the subject. So it really helps when you have a community around you that can support you and can, provide you with all the abbreviations and say, oh, this mechanic is actually representative of this in real life. This is what it means. If you have that sort of community around you, awesome, great. If you don't, and if you try to like go off of Reddit posts and Reddit threads and forums, Board Game Geek and whatever, it is so confusing. And I don't think any of the people that we introduced wargaming to, if we started them off with those types of war games, I don't think they would ever get in this area or would ever be interested in this area, because it is incredibly impressive, but at the same time, incredibly complicated to a fresh mind that has not seen that before or has not been introduced to similar stuff before. So my experiences with those, they were bad, I would say. But now I am a bit interested, because I am now personally interested in, oh, how did they do it? At those times, I'm professionally and personally involved in it. So now it's a bit better for me. I like hearing about them, I like learning about them, but it's still a bit confusing. And I think it will be a confusing thing for me for the next couple of years. until I got, quite used to it. But I think it's kind of, I would say it's a spectrum of understanding. And it is important that if you are introducing someone to wargaming, as much as like that could be the OG, the original of war games, it could be essential to the wargaming history and mechanics. It could be revolutionary in its time, but to a fresh mind, it is a puzzle that is incredibly difficult to solve. So it is, I think, more important to start off easy and then, go to more advanced war games rather than seeing the most important, quote unquote, important stuff before. That is my opinion and my experiences with, early or slash first war games. I think they're interesting now. Before, they were just complicated puzzles to me. So hopefully that helps a bit.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for the insights. And I can certainly relate, even though I've been playing board games for like 15 years or so. Complex ones, that is. All right, then. Thanks a lot, Ed, Luke, Ian, Richard, and Ada for joining today and the insightful presentations and discussions. Thanks to the audience for all the questions and discussion in the chat as well. And we will see you tomorrow with the other presentations and events of the conference. Goodbye.